Well, thank you, James, for that introduction, and thank you all this morning. I'm dialing in from sunny Singapore on a very early Monday morning for me, but it's great to be here. As James mentioned, I'm going to spend about 25 minutes talking to you about the DBS transformation, and it's just going to give you a little bit of flavor. This transformation has been in play for over a decade now, so I won't have time to go into every aspect, obviously, but I'm hoping that it'll be good enough to tee up some good Q&A at the end. So, true story, 12 years ago, I joined DBS, and on my very first day, I asked a taxi driver to take me to DBS, and he said, DBS, damn bloody slow. And that's where the phrase came from, this taxi driver. And it's because at that time, that's the reputation that DBS had. We were rock bottom of the customer satisfaction scores. Our employee engagement was terrible. People were embarrassed to be working at DBS. Our financial performance at best was mediocre. Yet, as you've heard, beginning in about 2016, we started winning awards, starting with the world's best digital bank, and now we're the first bank in history to hold all the 3 major best bank in the world awards simultaneously. But the one that I'm most proud of, bottom right in this slide, is this Harvard Business Review recognized DBS and its transformation as one of the top 10 transformations of the decade, along with companies like Netflix and Amazon, etc. So something I'm very personally proud of because I've been very much part of that journey for that decade. On the left-hand side is our CEO, who's been driving the transformation since he also joined just a few months after I did in 2009. And this was a cover of the Euromoney magazine, and something, again, I was very happy with the quote that they used when they awarded us Best Digital Bank about this idea about innovation pervading every aspect of what DBS does, which is exactly the strategy that we set out to do. So how do we do that? How do we go from being damn bloody slow to being the best bank in the world? And the answer is we went through a series of transformations, and they're listed out here, the majority of them, but each one successful in its own right, but built on the success of the previous. And we really did, learn a lot as we went on the way, and we took that learning with us. And I'm going to give you a flavor of some of these transformations, the one I think is where the biggest lessons were in the next three of the many. I just want to draw your attention to something I'm going to come back to, and this is these hashtags on this mountain, ABC, BBIW, and B3W. I'm going to explain what those are later. So before I dive into the 3 choices I've made on which transformations I'll go through, one thing I think is really important for any transformation, and something I believe DBS does very well, and something I personally learned from our CEO, is that the amount of time we spend looking outside, looking externally about what's happening, and making sure that we pick the right themes of these external trends and bringing them into the company and our strategy. Now, the fact that you guys are here at this conference implies that you guys are already doing that well and have an appetite for that, and I encourage you to do more of it. And by looking outside, we had 3 different waves of transformation, and which I've just listed out here. The first one being the Asian wave. 2009, we're coming out of the financial crisis, and we want to celebrate our Asianness because the rest of the financial industry, with maybe the exception of Australia, but it's going off the end of a cliff. The second one was obviously the digital wave. And we had a series of, I guess, unfortunate events that turned out to be fortunate, that made our realization that the digital age was coming, and we got on board that very quickly and sooner than most of our competition. And currently we're in the sustainability wave, which is of increasing importance. And for about 3 years now, we're really building sustainability into our core strategy. And so this idea about looking externally is very important. So let's go back in time, 2010, 2009, 2010, which is the very first transformation we did. And it kind of was the foundation of everything that followed. And we ended up vastly improving our customer experience over that period of time. As we were damn bloody slow, and we ended up taking 250 million customer waiting hours out of the system in that first year. If you go back in time, 250 million hours, you end up in the Stone Age. It really made a difference, and our customers noticed. And this is when we went from bottom to the top of customer sat scores in that first year, where we stayed pretty much ever since. And how do we do that? Well, what we did is actually ran a series of what we call process improvement events. And those of you who are familiar with Lean, it was essentially Lean techniques, although we were careful not to call it that. But we ran 5-day workshops across functional teams in a room, looking at any given process, customer process, and looking at ways of taking waste out of the system and collapsing our turnaround times. And the way it worked is, here's a photograph of a team of people. These guys are looking at something to do with credit cards, which is why they're holding their credit cards out. They go and physically walk the process. They map the process on the wall. You can see it behind. Any step in the process gets a red dot. Any step in the process that doesn't add value to customers, as they see it, gets a red dot. Any step in the process that adds value to customers gets a green dot. And you can see that you can't see any green dots on the wall behind. All the green dots are on the foreheads of the participants because they clearly think they're value to customers. But what it did, it was a big wake-up call about how much waste we had in our system. And then we empowered these people to make a change as quickly as possible and within that week, and then move on. And when we ended up running about 250 of these across several years. We ran 50 in the first year. But what we saw was we unlocked the energy and the passion of the company by doing that. And it was we stumbled into it, and I hadn't planned it that way. It just happened. I thought, wow, what's going on here? That people are really energized and really wanted to just help customers. And when I look back, we did a few things that drove that. And one was on the Wednesday of the workshop. We invited all the decision makers, typically the bosses of people in the room, and between them owned that process. And the team presented all the issues of the current process and some ideas about how to change it, and then asked them, can we do this? And 99 times out of 100, they said, yes, please give it a go. My predecessor had been trying to do the same thing over email, and they got nowhere because emails are easy to ignore. But if you're looking at somebody in the eye and they passionately want to change, you get a yes. The second thing we did was this customer hour, this unit of measure, and it wasn't something that we audited. We just said, everybody just contribute to eliminating customer waiting hours out of the system. And again, this was a very empowering approach that many companies now, including Google, by the way, have adopted this unit of measure based on our experience of how powerful it was. And the other thing about is getting people to be empowered to make quick action. And so we didn't allow anything to do with system changes. Back then, it would take 6 months to make the smallest system change. So we said, you have to pick things that you can do very quickly, hopefully within the same week. And by doing so, people saw immediate action on what they were doing, and gave them, looking back, gave them the creative confidence to move forward. So these are some of the things that we stumbled into. We thought, you know what, this is really working well, and we're going to take these forward. And it was, as I mentioned, the foundation of everything that followed. The second of these transformations was associated with innovation. And innovation at DBS had a couple of false starts. Firstly, we asked our most talented managing directors, a few of them, to go into a room and say, do not come out of that room until you've invented time travel. And guess what? When they came out, they had not invented time travel. But then we hired a really smart guy, made him Chief Innovation Officer. And he was one of the smartest guys I've ever come across. He had some fantastic new ideas about business models that were, guaranteed to be successful, but was unable to sell his ideas into the rest of the company. And that's when we learned from what the success we're having on the customer experience side and applied that to innovation. And what we did is we formed a small innovation team, and here they are, a very eclectic bunch of people, very few bankers, lots of young, energetic designers, entrepreneurs. Bijud down the front there, who's sitting down, who leads the innovation team. He used to work in Bollywood. So a really eclectic bunch. And we said, you can do whatever you want, but there's only one rule. And the rule is that under no circumstances are you allowed to innovate. And the reason is that we wanted to get them to teach the rest of the company how to innovate. Just build off that creative confidence that we realized we could unlock from our people. And so what we did is we create a program after program of inclusive innovation teaching and training. I mean, a lot of people thought innovation was, for the reserve of these creative, crazy types that didn't really exist in banks. But we wanted to teach people innovation. Innovation is a very teachable thing, and there are processes associated with it. So we have run tens of different programs, probably 100 different programs over the course of the last decade, just giving people ideas about how to innovate. I'll just give you a flavor of some of the things we did which is this graphic that we're looking at, is how we used engage with startups and had accelerators and incubators. At the first iteration, we were working with just a whole random bunch of startups because we wanted to give our executives exposure of what it was like to work at that kind of pace. And some of the, nothing to do with finance, one of the startups we're working with was making bamboo bikes. Another one was trying to find creative uses for ugly fruit that supermarkets didn't want, but it was purely just to give this experience to our executives. But now we're a lot more precise and more focused. So we have a different approach where we have a specific business problem to solve, and then my team will scan the fintech landscape and see which is the best fintech to work with. And now, we've formalized going from this very kind of inclusive approach to innovation to a much more of a structured innovation strategy, which has 4 tiers, which I don't have time to go through. But kind of the first tier at the top is called Big Themes, where we spend 3 days every 18 months with the top executive team researching the big, typically technology, but not exclusive technology trends out there, and making an assessment, forming a house view of which are the most relevant to our company, and then deciding to run experiments to learn more about them and see their relevance moving on. And that's really helped us get on the front foot with some of the emerging stuff. Okay, and the third and the final of the transformations that I wanted to talk about is around technology. And a lot of people think that technology is the secret to digital transformation. I don't think so at all, but it is an important ingredient. And so I just wanted to give you a flavor of how we approached it. And the first step that we did at DBS is we looked at a number of the big tech companies. And we didn't just go and look at the Google cafeterias and look at the brightly colored furniture and the bicycles, etc. We deep dived. And we were really looking at companies like Amazon, who have been through a big technology transformation themselves. Netflix, the same. They've taken 7 and 5 years respectively to move off their monolithic architecture, and in case of Amazon, create the cloud, and in case of Netflix, be an early adopter on the cloud. And they were very generous. They not only would they tell us how they did it, a lot of their code, etc., was open source, and they gave us a lot of advice. And we're inspired by them, and so much so we came up with this slogan inside DBS saying we wanted to be the D in Gandalf, all these companies, and we D for DBS. And it was very, it sounds a bit of a cliche, if you like, but it was really a wake-up call or a very motivating positioning especially for our technology people initially, because they said, what, we're a bank, it's primarily a technology company, and no longer are we comparing ourselves against other banks, but these big tech companies. And it really set the ambition at a different level. And what they taught us was how to do these transformations. And we had this strategy, which became known as the Gandalf wheel, which had all these various components, and a couple of them, I'll just go through quickly. One is how do we design for modern systems, how we take our legacy applications and not just drag and drop or lift and drop into the cloud, but to completely re-architect them where we're able to do so, embrace a lot of open source so we can get rid of the expensive proprietary vendors that we're charging as an arm and a leg for licensing. But most importantly, we re-architected to take advantage of the ever-reducing in cost commodity hardware. The x86 stack is to change the software so you could take advantage of that. And we just crashed the cost of running our application suite as a result of doing that. And the other place that we made a big improvement in our cost play was we had, when I joined in 2009, we were 90% outsourced to companies like IBM, but now we're 90% insourced. And one of the things I did about 5 years ago was set up a technology and innovation center in Hyderabad in India, and we started hiring world-class full-stack developers into that facility, because there's a recognition that if you want to be a digital company, you better take ownership of your own technology. And so we've got a massive shift of around that. So it had the dual advantage of owning and being accountable for our own IP, but also a massive cost play as well. So as a result of these two things we did, we reshaped how we are spending money on technology. By and large, we've kept our technology expenditure flat over the last 10 years, even though the bank has grown significantly. But more significantly is we switched the ratio of how much we spend on build versus run, so we can spend a lot more money on investing in our technology. So that gives you a flavor of, hopefully, of the transformations that we've been running over the past 12 years. And of course, I get a lot of questions, and a lot of people come visit us about what did you learn, what would you do differently along the way. And I've distilled this down into 10 lessons that I personally have learned. Again, don't have time to go into all 10, but we've picked 3 to go through, and we can of course dive into more of these in the Q&A. And the first one is this idea of the importance of painting a vivid and compelling picture of the future. You would be surprised of all the, many companies, and a lot of people come visit us at DBS to try and get some inspiration about how to do this. And you would be amazed how many of those companies are unable to adequately answer the question, you want to do transformation, but what are you transforming to and why? And maybe I get some very woolly answers, and more often than not, that different people from the same company have different answers. And so what we did very well, I think, was have this vivid picture that was also ridiculously ambitious. And if you remember those hashtags on that mountain I showed you and just pointed out, we've had 3 different ambition levels over the past decade. And we started off, and if you remember, we were an underperforming company. We were a bit tentative at first, and we had this idea about being ABC, or Asian Bank of Choice. We didn't want to be the best bank in Asia. We just said if customers start to choose us because we have this unique brand of service, then that would be good enough for us. But then we started getting some success about 5 years later, and we realized we'd had the ingredients in place for doing something a little bit more special. And our CEO set out this, what I thought was a completely crazy ambition to become BBIW, or the best bank in the world. In 2015, and as you heard, by 2018 we were starting winning these accolades. And now we've pivoted our ambition to, we're inspired a little bit by Simon Sinek's work about becoming an infinite company rather than a finite company, meaning that you'd rather comparing yourselves against your competitors, you just want to be a better version of yourself every day. And that's what our latest ambition is B3W, which is the best bank for a better world. And this is, all 3 of these really resonated with our employees, and especially being a best bank for a better world has really unlocked the purpose of the company, and again, hugely impactful. And this idea about being vivid is hugely important. And what we did in 2010, when we set the target of being Asian Bank of Choice, is we wrote a newspaper. You may have heard about Amazon's press release. So we did a whole newspaper. It was broadsheet, mock-up, meant to look a little bit like the Financial Times, but we described in detail every aspect of our strategy and what it would look like. We dated it 5 years in the future. And by 4 years later, we realized that that we had attained our vision in according to that newspaper. And it was a very powerful moment, which gave us the confidence to head for best bank in the world. And guess what? We wrote another newspaper, which was dated 2020, but we also started winning these accolades in 2018. But I have to say that we haven't attained all of those best bank in the world's criteria that we set ourselves yet, so we've still got some work to do. And finally, is we have been very consistent with our message. We have adapted it over time, and we have a representation we call the DBS House, which is just a single-page visual which explains to the whole company the facets of our strategy and approach. And the fact that we've had the same CEO in play now for 12 years and largely the same strategy, I think has been a hugely important element to that learning. Okay, the second lesson is this idea about creating a climate for change. And again, these are all inspired by conversations I have with visiting people and things that I think we've done and they haven't done. And I hear a lot of times where people set out on transformation journeys and haven't spent the time to get their people ready for the journey and just launch into it. And they're surprised by people when they kind of start hearing a little bit of resistance. And so we've and one of the most important ingredients to getting a right climate, of course, is creating a sense of psychological safety for people. It's a piece of work which Amy Edmondson has written about extensively and is gaining a lot of traction recently. And people like Edgar Schein have been talking about it for decades, but using slightly different vocabulary. But really, as a set of leaders, our job is to make people feel that they can challenge and contribute and feel excited about what we're trying to do. And a good day is not defined by pleasing my boss, or a good meeting is not defined as my boss didn't get angry, but by doing the right thing for customers. And you have to work at that. That does not come naturally to most big companies. And one of the things that we've been driving is this sense of curiosity. So I was delighted to hear James's tee up to this session around challenging everything, because this is what it's all about. I'm delighted that this whole set of conferences is called Curious Thinkers, because for me, curiosity is the one thing that we all need to unlock in our people if we want to be successful. Something happens to our curiosity as we get older. We start when we're in a toddlers and we start asking questions about absolutely everything. And something happens in our education system that just extracts our curiosity out of us, and it just gets worse in the workplace. And so we find that by asking questions and being genuinely curious as a leader creates a sense of curiosity, and it encourages people to challenge ideas. And we have rituals put in place at DBS that sets the expectation that everybody should challenge an idea, and we create spaces and meetings to do that. And as a result, we always get better decisions. Our highly paid person's opinions get challenged, etc. And I just think it's a really powerful concept that we try and embrace. Still work to do though. And the other one, and I believe Peter may have talked about this a little bit in his previous session about, if you've unlocked the curiosity of your people, then what we found is, people were eager to learn. And if you want to, for example, take a development team who's been working on legacy systems and ask them to become full stack developers, then you can't do that in a classroom. You have to unlock their curiosity and give them the right tools to do that. And so, the PIE example I gave you at the beginning is the training you would need to do a PIE occurred on a Monday morning. So this just-in-time training, unlocking curiosity and giving people the right skills so they have the confidence to go forward, a hugely important ingredient. And finally, and possibly my favorite, is this concept about it's all about the people stupid. So rather than it's all about the economy stupid in politics, in transformation, it's all about the people. And you would, so again, people come to see us and, see the way we've changed our technology, and they ask us can we see your architecture and your technologies? How did you do it, etc. And we're very open, and we tell people, we show them diagrams, etc. But frankly, it's the wrong question. The right question is, how did you motivate your development team who are working on legacy systems to have the appetite to actually want to transform and develop full stack? That's the right question. How do you do that? And it's not just in technology transformation, it goes for everything. And so again, we, right from the beginning, based on our learning on those PIEs, we made a decision which was contrary to the advice of the time, that we're going to bring the whole company along. We're not going to innovate in a small area and hope we can extend it from there. We're going to bring everybody along. And Piyush has this expression of Piyush, our CEO, that sheep can be wolves. And this came from a conversation we had Peter Ma, who is the founder and chair of Ping An Insurance out of China. And Peter Ma, who had done a brilliant job of transforming his company, but he brought in armies of young guys, highly talented young guys, and he's saying you can't mix these young guys, the wolves, with the existing people, the sheep. And Piyush says, no, we at DBS believe sheep can become wolves, and we've proven that to be true over the past 10 years, I would say. And then we realized something quite profound, is that as we started experimenting with things that were getting in the way of us having the right culture, the right mindset, is we began a programmatic approach to attaining our future state culture, which we defined very precisely. Our culture, also compelling and vivid picture of the future, which we describe as being a 28,000 person startup with very clear attributes, a lot of detail. And then we look for blockers, sort of things that were getting in the way. And then we ran experiments about how to overcome the blockers. And this was an approach we learned from operational excellence, but we call it culture by design. And it's been a super powerful approach to addressing some of our most difficult and thorny behavioral issues across the company. And this in turn is leading to something we're now thinking through, that when I look back on all those transformations, we didn't define them at the time about behavioral shifts. We kind of said we want to be digital, and so then you think about what behaviors you want. But actually, what I realized now is that the correct approach to transformation is define the leadership behaviors in particular, but also the rest of the behaviors, and work out how you're going to change those behaviors. Because unless you change the behaviors, you're not going to be successful. You may get some short-term wins, but you're not going to sustain. So it's quite an interesting development, which we're working on at the moment. And so with that, I shall pause, and I think we can move over to Q&A.
Yeah, well done, Paul. That was fantastic, really interesting. And Paul was too modest to say, I think, that he did all those lovely little drawings that illustrated his talk. They're excellent. When you touched on a number of times the importance of making everyone in your organisation part of the change, helping them all innovate for the company. A lot of companies, when they do that, they still treat innovation as icing, not cake, by which I mean they say, do your job, but we also want you to do some innovation and think up better ways of doing things, but do your job, and that's a separate extra thing. I always think it's more successful if you bake it into the cake. It's part of your job to look at what we do and think of ways of doing it better. Do you agree? And if so, how did you do that?
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And it's one of the things that when people ask me what would I do differently next time, it's exactly this thing. I got that wrong to start with, that I did position many of those transformations as things on top of your day job. And people, first thing they'll say, well, I haven't got time, we're already doing it. And I get a lot of these standard change kind of resistance mechanisms. And so we fought very hard and thought very hard to have a different approach. And the thing that's working in innovation in particular at the moment is when we move to our platform operating model, and where we created 33 platforms, essentially was about fusing together business and technology. If you want to be a digital company, you can't have those two things separate. So we had natural groupings of applications. We had a business leader and a technology leader, two in a box, both leading this, but same KPIs, same budget, same strategy, whereas all those things have been separate before. And then we said, okay, as part of this now, you need to drive ambitious innovation. And you need to do that by splitting your investment into three buckets, and, Horizon 1, Horizon 2, Horizon 3, which Horizon 3 was the most ambitious innovation. It's the 3 years kind of time frame, and we gamified how people would come up with their Horizon 3 strategy, and we created a board game called North Star. And the idea was that you'd get the key players from your platform, and you'd sit around a board, and there were these cards that represented trends of potential trends for 15 years in the future. So they would say things like 95% of cars would be autonomous. The average life expectancy in Singapore would be 120. And then what you do is you get the team to debate which of these were the most probable in their opinion. And then second round is which were most relevant to their particular area. And what you ended up, of course, is a typical consultant's two by two, but you had created a brilliant conversation to get kind of in the top right quadrant was a vision of what you think is going to happen 15 years from now, and then say, okay, if that's 15 years from now, what do we need to do now to get us there? And by doing that backcasting approach, it's proven to drive more ambition in your innovation. Of course, those trends were not just macroeconomic trends, there were technology trends, business trends as well. So, but we found that a brilliant way of baking in into the cake, to use your language, and we started doing that 3 years ago, and the vast majority of those platforms now have delivered their Horizon 3 agenda.
And by the way, don't forget to type in any questions if you've got them, questions or comments. And little things, Paul, work with that too. Like you gave a little hack almost. It's easier to ask people to change. It's easier to ask people to be empowered by being given permission to innovate and change the company in person than to send them their 83rd email for the day.
That's right. Yeah, and that was just when I think about it now, it's probably the single most powerful moment. And when I watched that unfold before my eyes when I did it for the first time, having heard these same set of people have been sitting on emails and ignoring them, and turn into these people, yeah, go for it, do it. And it was just like you wouldn't recognize the same behavior. And it's only by trying out these things, God, that really works, and having the confidence to, okay, that's just how we do this now forever. So that's the learning from that. Just trying all these different things. And as you said at the beginning, challenge everything.
Yeah. A question from Phil. How do you create the bandwidth to allow your employees to think, to develop ideas and drive transformation, given the constant overhead of compliance, BAU, and pressures on reducing staff costs already filling the working day?
Yeah, it's a great question. In fact, it's one of the 10 lessons. So bandwidth is hugely important. I mean, you can't ask a company that's already operating at, as we all are, at 110% utilization. You can't then say, good news, we're doing digital transformation. That's the recipe for not being successful. And so there's a couple of things that we have done. And if you ask Piyush Gupta, our CEO, that question, he would tell you that the reason my team exists is to address that problem exactly. He describes my team as his secret weapon. He describes our team as like internal McKinsey, that we turn up when our job is essentially to turn the vision of the company into executable programs of work, and we operate to just fill the bandwidth there, to create the bandwidth to make that happen. And then we sit through and coach departments of the company, help through any of those transitions. And we've been doing that for 12 years. We're pretty good at that now. And, unlike if you use a consultancy to do it, but, they're bringing fresh people every time, and it just, you don't have that muscle memory to help with that. So I think that's hugely important component. The other
but also
thing
the point you made earlier, sorry to interrupt, the point you made earlier about your job isn't to do all the innovation. Your job is to help everyone in the bank do it.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know what? That takes a bit of getting used to. If I naturally just want to get in there and do it. For goodness sake, do it like this. But to stand back and say, well, how about this? And much more of a coaching model. I have no mandate. So all my work is through influence and building relationships, so it takes a little bit of expertise, which we've got through getting it wrong so many times, to get that to be effective. But I just got to say, on the point about creating bandwidth is prioritization. And, we're still working through this, in my opinion, at DBS, is that we're not good at prioritizing. When there's the next thing to get done, is we just tend to give it to the people in the company and says, find a way of doing it, rather than the senior management making the tougher decisions about stopping things or reprioritizing things, etc. So I think, again, something for us to work on is getting that prioritization at the top of the company and right through the company more effective.
A bit of a cliche, but so often the urgent is prioritized over the important. If digital transformation is important, then even if it's not urgent to do it for tomorrow, you still got to find time for it and make sure you allocate the time to get it done in the time you need to get it done. Here's a question from Tim. what rewards were given to the idea generators, cash, holidays, promotion, recognition. I would say, before you even answer, that's icing. So if you see innovation as an extra to your job, not really part of the job, sure, you should get a reward for it. If everyone sees it as part of their job, as a KPI, then it goes into your overall appraisal, and you're rewarded in line with that factor and all the other factors. That's what I would say. What would you say?
I agree with that at the fundamental level. It's really important to position it in that way. We have a approach to transformation which we call the T shape, and the T shape is at the broad part of the T. As I mentioned, the PIEs, we just encourage participation and reward participation, and so we make it very easy for people to join a PIE or whatever the subsequent transformation was. And you may or may not be successful. We're not going to audit you. But then there is the deep part of the T where we pick, in the case of that particular transformation, we pick 6 areas where we really need to get it right and focus. We put investment, we put management oversight in place. And so that's one thing to say about it. The second thing to say is we have not fired a single person in DBS for not getting on board the transformation. But the people who have got on board have found their careers have accelerated more than the others. So again, it's all part of psychological safety. We want people to get on board for the right reason. But having said all that, we do run and we gamify, right? So if we want to get ideas at mass, we will offer prizes. And so if you participate, and we have a crowdsourcing platform which we built ourselves, so where people can vote on best ideas, and it's very transparent, and so the best ones bubble to the top, and then we'll give an iPad to the winner, for example. We do that kind of stuff, but we don't incentivize specifically for if somebody comes up with a great idea and it makes a lot of money. That's just part of the day job.
Yeah. Easy to answer, I suspect, question. How many people in the team at DBS Singapore and worldwide?
We have, if it's total employees, we have about 30,000 worldwide, and we're primarily in 6 markets, so across six markets. Around about a third of those will be in Singapore.
From Caroline, have you made any changes to the way you recruit that will ensure you continue to innovate and transform? Are you looking for specific qualities in addition to the relevant technical experience?
Yeah, massive changes in specific areas. I mentioned when I set up the Innovation Center in Hyderabad, one of the things we just needed to attract a lot of people over a short period of time when our brand in India at the time wasn't particularly strong, and we wanted to attract world-class talent. And so what we did is create a process called Hack to Hire, and we use social media and high energy advertising to get as many people as possible to participate initially in some online tests around coding, and then eventually those who pass those will come physically together and they'll go through a 48-hour hackathon, and we're working with our guys so we can really see what their coding skills, what they operate under pressure and as a team. And we've hired some of our best quality full stack developers as a result of that process. It really was effective. And we ended up, I think I remember the exact numbers now, but the first time we ran out, I think 90,000 people applied, and we ended up hiring 50. That order of magnitude. Those numbers may not be exactly right, but that order of magnitude. So you can just see how we could really have a really impressive funnel. Other roles, we've changed the way we've actually automated a lot of our recruitment process, so we can using chatbots in the initial phases, so we can broaden the funnel. We look a lot more for, as you might expect, for cultural fit than we did in 10 years ago. So yeah, it's not a single answer, but in many different ways, we fundamentally changed the way we recruit.
Yeah, and we've still got a few minutes left, so if you've got any questions, do send them in. How do I convince my board that we need to go through a digital transformation? Before I go to you, my answer would be do the math. We saw Peter in his first presentation present some very persuasive stats that suggested going through a digital transformation would improve your chances of being profitable in the future. Do the maths, present a compelling business case, so it would be dumb for people to go, no, we shouldn't do that. That'd be my answer. What's yours?
Yeah, well, I would add to that. Okay, first thing is get Peter to present to your board, and that usually works. That's usually enough. Peter's presented to a lot of our senior people and have a big impact. What some of the things we've done at DBS, I think again, well, and I've learned from our CEO on this is to, I talked about those waves earlier, and to give the board exposure to those waves early. So back in 2014, we took the board to South Korea. And at that time, South Korea was the furthest advanced in digital banking. Really, it wasn't called digital banking then, but a lot of the banks there had apps, etc., and internet banking. And so we went there and immersed ourselves and spoke to those South Korean banks. And as a result of that trip, the board were very, very ambitious in what we need to get done in our own digital agenda. And aligning the whole company is hugely important. And so one of the things that we've done at DBS is we run the company on a balanced scorecard approach, but we've got a big new section. I say new, it's probably 7 years old now, which we used to just have two sections. One was just traditional measures for financials, customer, employee, and then the bottom section was the top 20 things we needed to get done in that year. But for the last 7 or 8 years, we now have a middle section, which is all about the transformation agenda, what we need to get done the next 12 months on our transformation journey. And therefore that goes in front of the board as our success criteria for the year and determines our collective bonus pool. And so two things are happening there. You're having a conversation with the board about how you're viewing success, and then you're also saying to the company, this is really important, it's on the scorecard, take note. A big signal and very powerful.
Paul, you mentioned that creating a sense of psychological safety was important, letting people know that it's okay to challenge the status quo and suggest ideas to improve things. Would you agree that if you open the door like that, but then people don't see that management is actually following through and trialling and implementing the best ideas, but their ideas, their challenges are just being accepted, but they're never hearing anything back, that's kind of counterproductive? If you're going to do the front end, you've got to do the back end?
Yeah, of course. I mean, psychological safety is a little bit of a misunderstood. Certainly when we started talking about it, a lot of people thought it was just about being nice to each other. It's not that at all. It's about creating an environment where people are feeling they can challenge an idea or put forward an issue without any fear whatsoever of retribution, and that there will be an action, to your point, action taken on that. And as long as it's perfectly okay if the boss listens and to all these objections, and then at the end of the meeting, if it's a meeting situation, say thanks for your contributions, it's really helped me form my opinion, but we're still going to do it this way. That's okay, as long as it's not like that every time. But that just having that dialogue is hugely important. But it's similar to people coming up with ideas for innovation. Unless people feel that their ideas are at least heard and considered, then people don't give you any further ideas. So we have a rule that anybody who submits an idea will have some kind of response to say if the idea is going to be put forward, to an indication why that's the case.
Yeah, fantastic. I understand that partnering, there's a question, is an important part of digital transformation. How did DBS choose the right partners?
Yeah, so I'm not quite sure. Partners means different things, I guess. But you're absolutely right. I mean, the first point's so true, because nobody wakes up in the morning and says, "Hey, today's a great day to do some banking. Come on, let's do some banking together." And it was a bit of a wake-up call for a lot of bankers, for all bankers anyway, in around 2013, 2014, when we started talking about the job to be done, and the job to be done not being find a mortgage but buying a home, and the mortgage part was only part of a broader journey. But that was that created the realization that we did need to start working with partners. So that triggered our massive investment in developing APIs. And I think it was about 2017 we launched the world's biggest financial API portal, and as a result we've just created, I've lost count of the number of different partners we have, different use cases that we have. But each one is bit by bit solving the broader entire job to be done, to use a Clayton Christensen phrase. So hugely important to do that.
Final question. When you put up those top 10 points, I think it was point 7 or 8, I was fascinated by, but you didn't talk to, get ready for the immune system. What the heck does that mean?
Yeah, so this is what I teach my team, my transformation team, is that if you're driving transformation, even if you get the climate for change right, and et cetera, you are going to get resistance. And do not be surprised by that. If you're not getting resistance, then you're not changing. Because people generally, as soon as you're trying to change your behavior, then we all feel a little bit awkward about that. And so we know there are, and I just touched on these earlier, there's certain standard responses we get from people who which is a bit passive aggressive kind of behavior, but and be ready for it. So typically people say, we're already doing that, right? And so don't let that response take you by surprise. Have an answer saying, explain to them why they're not already doing it and why they need our help to change. The other one is, that's not relevant to our part of the business. Again, have an answer ready. Another one is, and you touched on it earlier, we're too busy. How can we possibly do this when we're trying to do, make money for the company or solve customer problems here? So all those things is just be ready. Don't be surprised by it. And if it doesn't come, you should be asking yourself why it's not coming and why aren't we changing hard enough.
That was fascinating. Paul, thank you so much for your time, the big picture story and the very practical lessons that I'm sure lots of people watching this will be able to learn from, take away and implement. So thanks once again.
Thank you very much. A pleasure being here.